When I first arrived on Lavender Lane, the cobblestone street gleamed under the warm afternoon sun, and lavender bushes dotted each front yard with delicate purple blooms. My tiny cottage stood at the far end, a charming structure with white shutters and a slate-grey roof. Its biggest draw was the attic, which I could hardly wait to sort through, even though I'd moved in only the previous day. The idea of rummaging through dusty boxes, unearthing old mementos, and pondering the lives once lived beneath those rafters filled me with eager delight. On the second afternoon in my new home, I decided to tackle the attic at last. I found the trapdoor in the upstairs hallway and wrestled it open. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light as I pulled down the ladder and ascended into the dim space. Low-hanging beams brushed my head, and the air was thick with the sweet, earthy smell of old wood. Several crates sat in one corner, and a few rickety chairs were stacked against the wall. In the far back, there was a wooden trunk, its edges bound in tattered leather, a rusted key wedged in the lock, as if it had been abandoned a century ago. With a bit of effort, I turned the key and lifted the lid. Inside, I discovered stacks of postcards, tied together with coloured ribbons, each bundle labelled with a year. The earliest was from 1950, the most recent from 1970. The postcards varied in design. Some depicted scenic mountain views, others famous landmarks of European cities, and still more showed the glitz of Hollywood movie sets. My heart fluttered a bit. This was just the sort of mystery I had always hoped to find in an attic. Why would such a trunk be here, in a modest cottage, in such a quiet neighborhood? I carefully lifted the top bundle and read the first postcard. It was dated July 1950, from Paris, the city of light. It bore a delicately penned greeting. I wish you were here with me. My training never ceases to push me to new heights. One day the world will know my name. Yours, H. Huh? Intrigued, I moved on to the next. This one featured the bustling avenues of New York City. Its message was short. Audition done, fingers crossed. H. Could H be Harriet, the graceful older woman who lived 3 houses down and wore wide-brimmed hats? I'd only spoken to her twice so far, but something in my gut told me she might be the mysterious H. As I looked through more of the postcards, a narrative ignited in my mind. These weren't ordinary souvenirs from holiday trips. They chronicled someone's journey to become a performer, traveling to theaters in Europe and the United States, showing unwavering determination with each new audition. One from Rome included the note, "I've landed the role, my dream is becoming reality." Another from London read, "Performing at the Royal Opera House next month. I can hardly believe it." 8. The progression was clear. H started as an aspiring artist and eventually landed significant parts in some of the world's most renowned venues. I'd barely met Harriet for more than a few minutes, but her regal posture and the melodic lilt in her voice hinted at a dramatic past. I recalled how she inadvertently called me darling the day of my move-in, as if she'd just stepped off a theatre stage. At the time, I thought it was a quaint expression from an older generation. Now my curiosity was piqued. Was Harriet once a grand opera singer or an acclaimed actress? That evening, after I dusted my hands and closed the attic door, I wandered down Lavender Lane for a stroll. Despite the hour, the street exuded an almost timeless serenity. Soft yellow porch lights glowed along the row of cottages, and honeysuckle mingled with the ever-present scent of lavender. I thought about Harriet, who lived alone in a pale blue house with a spindle railing around the porch. She usually spent her evenings there, with a cup of tea and a book, her cat curled at her feet. I wondered how to broach the subject of those postcards without sounding nosy. The next morning, intent on turning the postcards into an opportunity to get to know my neighbour, I arranged them in chronological order on my kitchen table. They painted a clear story. Harriet had travelled extensively, forging a career on stage, receiving glowing reviews, and occasionally sending updates to an unknown addressee. The lines of cursive revealed highs and lows, One dated August 1957 described a triumphant performance in Milan, while another from early 1960 lamented a humbling rejection. Then, after the final postcard from 1970, a triumph at a glamorous Hollywood event, there was silence. I decided to investigate around Lavender Lane. My first stop was at the Cozy Brew Cafe at the corner of Stonebridge Road, where neighbours loved to gather for gossip and pastries. Mrs. Patterson, known for her signature scones and her endless wealth of local knowledge, was seated by the window. She greeted me with a warm smile. I asked what she knew of Harriet and got a hesitant laugh in response. "Oh, Harriet's lived here for ages, dear. Well, as long as I can recall. She keeps her personal history quiet, but rumour says she was once in showbiz." Over cups of chamomile tea, Mrs. Patterson affectionately pointed out Harriet's reclusiveness about her past. "She doesn't like to talk about it, but I've heard she travelled all over the world. Likely something happened that made her want to settle down, keep to herself." She stopped stirring her tea for a moment. "I doubt there's any scandal. I think she just wanted a peaceful life. Some people get too famous for their own good, you know." I thanked Mrs. Patterson for her insight and headed back down Lavender Lane with the new knowledge swirling in my mind. That evening, I worked up the courage to drop by Harriet's porch. She was there, precisely as predicted, reading in the fading daylight. A porch lantern cast a soft golden glow on her face, and I saw the refined grace of someone who once performed under bright lights. She welcomed me to join her, and we chatted about the neighbourhood, the cottage, and her cat, an affectionate orange tabby named Archibald. Eventually I mentioned the trunk in my attic, describing the stacks of postcards I'd discovered. Harriet's face flickered with an unreadable expression. Something like surprise could have danced across her features, or perhaps quiet panic. But she composed herself quickly, smiling politely. "How interesting," she commented, glancing at her clasped hands. "Wherever did that trunk come from, I wonder?" Emboldened by her somewhat evasive answer, I set my teacup down. "That's what I'm trying to find out. They were from someone who signed their name H, who travelled to places like Paris, New York, and Milan to perform. I don't know if they belong to the previous homeowner or if there's another explanation." My heart pounded slightly, uncertain if this was too direct. Harriet didn't immediately respond. Her eyes traced the curling steam from her teacup. Then, finally, in a much softer voice, she asked, "May I see them?" Her request was quiet, yet it confirmed my suspicions. Perhaps Harriet's story was contained in those postcards, and she needed to revisit it carefully. The following day, Harriet came over to my cottage. She moved quietly as we sat at the kitchen table, the postcards spread between us. She picked one up, the earliest from Paris, then gently ran her fingertips over the handwriting. A small nostalgic smile graced her lips. "Yes," she said, voice trembling slightly. "Yes, these are mine." I watched as she became lost in memories. She explained that as a young woman, she had nurtured a dream of performing on stages worldwide. Her father encouraged her to pursue her creative talent, and thus she embarked on a whirlwind journey, starting in Europe, singing in small opera houses. Soon after, she landed notable roles in New York theaters. Finally, her career stretched into film. During the 1960s, Harriet had garnered fame, traveling extensively and sending postcards to her father. Each card was meant to reassure him that she was succeeding, reminding him that neither of them had wasted their hopes. Her voice quavered when she reached the final postcard, dated 1970, a glimpse of Hollywood's iconic sign. "This was the last one I sent before I got the call about my father's illness. He passed away soon after, and everything changed," Harriet said. The memory brought a wistful sorrow to her grey eyes. "I didn't want the flourish and applause anymore. I wanted to come back to Lavender Lane, settle down near the garden he loved, and simply live quietly." I poured Harriet another cup of tea to ease the tension. She admitted she'd tried to keep her past as private as possible because it felt too personal. Her successes were built on her father's unwavering support, and losing him abruptly made her want to protect her memories rather than celebrate them. "I'm not ashamed of it," she said with a half-smile. "But I didn't want it to define me either. Lavender Lane let me be Harriet, the neighbor with a cat, not Harriet the star from yesteryear." When I asked how the trunk ended up in my attic, Harriet explained that my cottage had once belonged to her father's closest friend, Mr. Bellamy. She'd entrusted some keepsakes to him years ago, having no desire to keep them in her own home. Over time, Mr. Bellamy passed on, and the trunk remained forgotten. "I suppose whoever inherited the house simply tossed it into the attic," she said, eyes focusing distantly on the swirl of patterns in the tea. "I never expected it to be found, especially not by someone so kind and curious." Though I sensed Harriet's vulnerability, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. The postcards were heartfelt, but there was also an undercurrent of tension in certain lines, an anxiousness greasing the edges of her triumphant updates. "Were there hardships along the way?" I asked gently. Harriet contemplated my question, then quietly began describing the real trials of a performer's life. She spoke of cutthroat auditions, about the heartbreak of losing roles to nepotism or bigger names. She confessed that she had turned down a chance to sign with a major studio after discovering unscrupulous dealings behind the scenes. "I wanted to keep my integrity," Harriet said, "but it put me on the blacklist for a while. I rarely mentioned those postcards in detail. I didn't want my father to worry." It turned out Harriet's father had been her sole family. Her mother passed away when she was young, so heartbreak was something Harriet had carried quietly, fueling her performances. Each success had also required sacrifice, missed holidays, lost friendships, and an on-again, off-again love interest who never quite understood her devotion to her art. When her father was diagnosed with a terminal illness, Harriet suddenly realized the toll of her absentee presence. Despite her father's unwavering encouragement, she knew it was time to go home and cherish what days remained with him. After he passed, she never left Lavender Lane. At that moment the cat, Archibald, brushed against Harriet's leg and meowed softly, as though sensing the emotional strain in the room. Harriet picked him up and stroked his fur, her red lacquered nails a subtle nod to her dramatic past. "You see, dear," she said, taking a deep breath, "the postcards were the last illusions of my ambitions. After that final one, I returned to a new reality." My empathy swelled. The day I had moved in, Harriet had offered lemonade and kept me company, a simple neighborly kindness that spoke volumes about her character. Now I understood her deeply. She had chosen a quiet existence as a method of healing and remembrance, not as a retreat out of shame or fear. She had poured her heart onto those postcards, preserving her father's faith in her. Only after confronting me and the trunk's contents did she come face to face with that piece of herself once again. Closing the trunk carefully, Harriet asked a favor of me. "Please, could I borrow these postcards? Just for a time. I want to sort through them and decide what remains important for me to keep and what I can let go." I agreed, feeling I had a responsibility to return the postcards to their rightful owner. She departed my cottage with a gentle kiss on my cheek, and I stood in the doorway feeling both warmth and a lingering sense of wonder. In that old trunk, Harriet's identity had been tucked away for decades, waiting for someone new and inquisitive to invite it out into the open. Over the next few weeks, Harriet no longer seemed wary of revealing her past. She'd mentioned small anecdotes when we passed each other on the lane, like the time she accidentally tripped over a stage cable in London just moments before her final cue, or how a colleague once tried to sabotage her costume. She told these stories lightly, with a mixture of humor and nostalgia. The neighbors too began to catch wind that Harriet was embracing her showbiz days. Mrs. Patterson, for one, was delighted. Other residents occasionally joked that Harriet should hold a small retrospective at the local community centre. Harriet, flustered yet pleased, would wave off the idea with a gracious smile. Yet the trunk's revelation demanded a more tangible resolution. Harriet discovered a letter hidden beneath the postcards, an unopened message from her father. It was dated a mere week before his passing. Upset that she had never read it, Harriet came to me one drizzly afternoon, letter in shaking hands. She asked me to sit beside her on the couch while she opened it. Her reading voice trembled as she took in the words. It turned out the letter was her father's final blessing, brimming with encouragement. He urged her to never regret the choices she had made, for each performance and challenge had shaped her into a woman he was proud to call his daughter. The letter ended with, "No matter where you are or what stage you take, I'm always in the front row cheering for you. Come home if you need peace. Follow your dream if you need freedom, but know that my love is unwavering in all seasons. Dad." Tears slipped down Harriet's cheeks, and I found my own eyes watering too. There, in that single page, lay the reassurance Harriet had needed all these years. She folded the letter with trembling hands and sealed it in a protective sleeve. "I owe you a tremendous debt, my dear," she whispered, turning toward me. "You see, I thought I had read all my father's letters, but perhaps fate saved this for when I was ready to embrace it." After that day, Harriet seemed freer. She wore her wide-brimmed hats with renewed confidence. She hummed tunes absent-mindedly as she strolled down the lane, greeting neighbors with warmth. In a way, discovering that trunk had helped Harriet rediscover herself, both the star she had once been and the gentle soul she had chosen to become. One weekend, Harriet surprised everyone by volunteering to take part in the community's annual spring festival. She offered to sing at a makeshift stage behind the lavender fields that gave the lane its name. The entire neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Come Saturday afternoon, folding chairs were placed in neat rows, baskets of lavender were arranged as decorations, and a quiet sense of anticipation ran through the crowd. Harriet, dressed in a flowing lilac gown, stepped onto the small stage. Soft light from the sun caught in her silver hair. She cleared her throat and, after a moment's pause, began to sing. Her voice carried across the air like a gentle breeze through the lavender, rich and emotive, honed by years of practice. She sang an aria from a classic opera, a piece she once performed at the Royal Opera House. Though time had slightly tempered her range, the depth of passion and feeling radiating from Harriet was enchanting. Tears glistened in the eyes of the older neighbors, many who had never known the full extent of her history. Children gaped, transfixed, even in that modest setting. A small stage in a sleepy neighborhood, Harriet's voice soared, weaving a tapestry of memory, love, and acceptance in every note. When the final phrase died away, the applause sprang up with wholehearted fervor. Harriet smiled graciously, tears shining in her eyes. For a small moment it seemed she was no longer the quiet neighbor, but the talented artist the postcards had described, resilient, courageous, and in love with her craft. Yet the difference was that now, Harriet stood comfortably between the past and present, embracing both. Standing backstage with the hush of the receding applause still lingering, she caught my eye, her expression full of gratitude. After the show, neighbors lined up to congratulate Harriet, many with bouquets of lavender in hand, a silent testament to her place in their hearts. Mrs. Patterson enthusiastically pressed Harriet for more stories of her grand performances overseas. Others offered to share photos from the festival, wanting to preserve the memory of Harriet's revived performance. Harriet graciously accepted every compliment, her gentle laughter resonating much like her singing voice had, still brimming with that new clarity of self. Eventually, the crowds dissipated, leaving Harriet and me near the stage. She handed me a sprig of lavender and confided, "I never thought I'd sing in front of people again. Somehow, putting away those old secrets allowed me to open my heart. Thank you for coming to Lavender Lane. Thank you for finding that trunk and not brushing it aside." In the upcoming days, the postcards remained in Harriet's home. She planned to place them in an album, along with a newly discovered letter from her father. She wanted to honor the journey that shaped her, while recognizing that the here and now was every bit as precious. I helped her organize them chronologically, matching postcards with dates of her major performances. Though I had never been part of such a glamorous world, Harriet's humility and determination reminded me that every life has chapters worth treasuring. Word eventually spread beyond our small neighborhood about Harriet's magical performance at the Spring Festival. A local newspaper reporter approached her, hoping to run a feature on The Star Among Us. This time, Harriet accepted. In a short interview, she spoke of how she once stood on grand stages but lost the joy of it when her father fell ill. She described how a chance discovery had led her to confront her memories, culminating in a performance she graciously shared with her neighbors. The article ran a week later. Neighbors brought Harriet copies of the paper, thrilled to see her recognized. She placed a folded clipping in her new memory album, where it joined the postcards and the letter of love from her father. Time marched on, as it always does. Lavender Lane remained as picturesque as when I arrived. Cheerful houses, friendly faces, and the omnipresent scent of flowers in bloom. But one thing had changed. Harriet was no longer a reclusive figure in a wide-brimmed hat. Now she'd sit on her porch, and tales of her old theatre days would drift with the summer breeze. Archibald lounged on the windowsill, purring contentedly whenever passers-by stopped to admire the cat that belonged to the neighborhood's newly acknowledged star. And I, the new resident who unknowingly brought Harriet's past into the light, had found a friend. I'd drop by with scones or fresh tea, or we'd chat in my living room, flipping through the postcards and the letter, reliving Harriet's adventures with every swirl of memory. There was no more trunk in my attic, no more dusty ribbons hiding postcards of dreams. Instead, those postcards lived openly in Harriet's home, framed and shared whenever she felt the urge to pass on a life lesson. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of her father's letter and remembered how small details, simple messages on paper, could contain entire worlds of encouragement and love. Each evening, as dusk settled on Lavender Lane, a gentle calm spread across the tidy lawns and fragrant bushes. Porch lights flickered on one by one, and at Harriet's house a comforting glow often illuminated her silhouette at the window. She had found balance, a storied past reconciled with her quieter present. Once she had worried about how the world perceived her, but now she recognized that she was surrounded by friends who appreciated her talents and her humanity in equal measure. I sometimes thought back to that dusty trunk in the attic, and how it felt like a little puzzle box, a whisper from the past that promised a story of ambition and heartbreak, love and memory. Unraveling the postcards revealed more than Harriet's hidden identity. It uncovered her heart and brought a new richness to our community. In my narrower view, it also gave me a friend, a warm, supportive companion in a new place that had once felt foreign. In that sense, everything had come full circle. Now, whenever I pass Harriet's porch, I see a gentle wave or a serene smile. Sometimes she hums a melody under her breath, lost in thoughts of stages far away, yet deeply anchored in the present by the lane she calls home. And each time, I feel grateful for the accidental discovery that set all this in motion. Because in Lavender Lane, even the quiet streets and dusty attics can harbor pieces of our best-kept secrets, waiting to guide us toward understanding, acceptance, and an unexpected bond with those who share our corner of the world.